Israeli decision makers have made it very clear that if the Iranians try to involve Israel in this escalation, all bets are off regarding the Israeli retaliation. They have made it clear they will not be restrained by the U.S. They will go after targets in the target bank that have not yet been attacked at any stage during the past two Iran wars. So let me start with the situation regarding Iran and the United States. A lot of people are asking, what does this mean for Israel? Is Israel going to end up being dragged in or involved in this conflict? So first of all, let me break down how I see the current situation. The main reason why the U.S. and Iran are involved in what I would describe as low-level, low-grade conflict between the two of them right now is because a month ago they signed an agreement which I like to describe as a memorandum of misunderstanding. It's officially known as the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. It was signed last month, and it was supposed to be a temporary 60-day diplomatic window in which time Washington and Tehran would somehow miraculously work out all of their differences and proceed to a final nuclear agreement. Now, this memorandum talks about the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians and the Americans are each interpreting the clause in this temporary MOU in completely and radically different ways, in ways that essentially guarantee that they would end up in a collision course. The Americans interpreted the MOU as saying that the Strait of Hormuz would now be open for shipping, and that oil tankers and gas tankers, natural gas tankers, can take multiple routes in this area. They can go down the Omani coastline under American protection. And the Iranians interpreted this MOU, it's literally a memorandum of misunderstanding, as saying that basically they have full control of Strait of Hormuz. Billions of dollars are going to come into the Iranian economy, which is completely battered by the war. Hundreds of billions of dollars lost. And even before that, the Iranian economy was a train wreck because of wild inflation and currency crashes and a whole range of economic, I would call it catastrophes. One of the reasons why the Iranians went out into the streets back in January and were massacred in tens of thousands well before this war even began. So the Iranians were hoping that the MOU would be the beginning of their ability to save their economy, and they wanted to claim ownership of the Strait of Hormuz. So we have diametrically opposed interpretations. And so when the Iranians saw tankers going down the Omani coastline, they fired on them using the remnant capabilities that they have left. They fired on them. And the U.S. said, what are you doing? This is a violation of the MOU. And this is how we got into a situation where every night there are multiple airstrikes by CENTCOM, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy. We also first time saw the use of suicide naval autonomous craft by CENTCOM. Of course, the American firepower is very, very impressive and precise. And I would say a small percentage of it is actually being used here. This is all still low level, and we're seeing all kinds of targets on the southern Iranian coastline, mostly surveillance stations, radar stations, missile bases, especially anti-ship missiles, cruise missiles, drone bases, communication towers and control towers. All of this military hardware is being struck by CENTCOM in order to degrade Iran's ability to try and enforce its will over the Strait of Hormuz. So this entire fight is about the Strait of Hormuz. This is what it's about. We haven't even gotten to actual negotiations about the Iranian nuclear program, which was supposed to be the main topic of this diplomatic process. So this just shows you where we are, how soon the two sides got stuck. I think the Iranians were really taking advantage of what they perceived as Trump's over-eagerness to end the war, to put the whole thing behind him, to turn his attention to other matters. They recognize that, and it's very surprising that a president who talks about the art of the deal in a book gives away the worst thing you can give to Iranian negotiators from the Islamic Republic, which is an eagerness to end a war And even though the Iranians emerged from this war clearly with in an inferior position with most of their capabilities destroyed, they are now engaged in a war of attrition for the future of the Strait of Hormuz, so that they can try and extract what they believe could be a really big achievement. Now, the interesting part here is that none of this is about Israel. So basically, Israel has not been involved. The Iranians, in their retaliation, have targeted U.S. bases in Kuwait, in the UAE, in Jordan, in Qatar, in Bahrain, all across the Gulf. They're firing. They have not targeted Israel. And one of the main reasons for that is because Israeli decision makers have made it very clear that if the Iranians try to involve Israel in this escalation, all bets are off regarding the Israeli retaliation. They have made it clear they will not be restrained by the U.S. They will go after targets in the target bank that have not yet been attacked at any stage during the past two Iran wars, and that Israel will see this as an opportunity to hit targets that could really destabilize the Iranian regime, which is already weak and not stable at all. And I think that those messages have been heard in Tehran. That doesn't mean that we know what's going to happen tomorrow, but what we know, I'll talk about the future scenarios in a second, is that this is now a brinkmanship-like conflict between the U.S. and Iran. Israel is staying out of it. It's focusing on operations in Lebanon and Gaza and other arenas. You've heard me talk in past recordings about the new Israeli security doctrine, and I think it's important to bring that in. The new Israeli security doctrine essentially states that jihadist actors, whether they're state actors or non-state actors, will not be allowed to build up threatening capabilities ever again while Israel sits on the side and banks on being able to deal with them later, or banks or gambles on deterrence, totally failed concept, 7th of October, or the ability to use, carrots and sticks to influence the behavior of the jihadist enemies that we're facing, whether they're in Tehran or Gaza or Beirut, you name it. And so the new doctrine says that if intelligence comes in of threatening capabilities that are being built by jihadists, preventative action is taken. We've seen Israel apply this across the board, and this has transformed the Middle East. Now, when we're talking about Iran, the reason why Iran's missile program has been severely degraded is because Israel applied this doctrine on February 28th of this year when it launched, together with the United States, the second Iran war, Operation Roaring Lion, Epic Fury. Everybody's got a different name for it. And this came several months after June 2025, when Israel and the United States launched a major campaign. And it has to be noted that the vast majority of this campaign was fought by Israel alone, because we've seen a lot of distortions about that, targeting of the Iranian nuclear program. So the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranian missile program, and the Iranian proxy program, this ring of fire that the Iranians had spent decades building around Israel in the form of Hezbollah, Hamas, militias in Syria, proxies that were designed to be part of this plan to destroy the world's only Jewish state. All three of these, I would say, projects or efforts have been severely degraded: the nuclear program, the missile program, and the proxy program. And so what Israel is saying is, whatever happens now in this escalation between Iran and Israel, whether Israel gets pulled into it or not, none of this changes the long-term new Israeli doctrine. What does that mean in practice? That if intelligence comes in and it shows that the Iranians are rebuilding, let's say, the nuclear program, or they're trying to rebuild the missile program, action is going to be taken, whether there's an agreement or whether there's not an agreement. That's what the new security doctrine calls for. That's the Israeli independent insurance policy. And if these attacks haven't occurred, that's only because the Iranians have not reached the stage where they can actually rebuild these battered capabilities in any meaningful way. That they're too badly damaged in the aftermath of the last war to be able to, in any sort of industrial, large-scale manner, rebuild these threatening existential threats. And so Israel is observing the situation. I've spoken to the IDF. The IDF is at a high level of alert. They're preparing for a whole range of scenarios. I'm sure that they're building up the new target bank just in case this becomes necessary against Iran. But in terms of where this is going, I think that we kind of have three scenarios, right? One, the status quo continues. This low-level tit for tat goes on for months, at least until the U.S. midterms. And then after that, it's either going to go to an escalation, it's either going to escalate fully, or it's going to go to some sort of reduction and attempt to negotiate the final stage of this agreement between the U.S. and Iran. Now, in between that, there's all kinds of sub scenarios, but those are the main three scenarios. And I think, from the Israeli perspective, it's important to point out that the status quo is not bad because, first of all, the exemption that the Trump administration gave to Iran for oil exports has been revoked, and the blockade on Iranian exports is back on. I think that's the single best thing that can be done to destabilize this regime. It doesn't necessitate a return to full-scale war. Just simply choking them off is going to cause a chain reaction of instability within the Islamic Republic, which is really masking and hiding so many of its structural weaknesses and tensions within society. So just continuing the blockade, I think, is a really good development and a step. It's a sort of course correction by Trump. I think it's a really welcome development. It also shows, by the way, why all of these conclusions a month ago saying, oh, the Iranians have won the war and everything is lost, were premature. It's simply, I think, irresponsible to draw sweeping conclusions about where all of this is going. But that doesn't mean that, there's no grounds for criticizing the MOU, the Memorandum of Misunderstanding, because it's a deeply, deeply flawed agreement, which has basically opened the door to exactly this kind of confusion and emboldened the Iranians. So the criticism, I think, is totally in place. But in terms of where this is all going, I would say beware of all of these sweeping, generalized conclusions by all kinds of commentators who think that they have a crystal ball. I've got news for them. They don't. So those are the three main scenarios going forward, either status quo, war of attrition, kind of low-level conflict, or it's going to escalate, and it could escalate, by the way, with Israel or without it. So those are the sub-scenarios, or it goes into diplomacy. Now, from the Israeli perspective, going to diplomacy is the worst of the scenarios because nothing good can come out of it. The Iranians are not going to really give up any of their very dangerous ambitions, not their nuclear ambitions. They're going to use any economic recovery to try and rebuild their threatening and hegemonic ambitions. They are a hazard to world security, and therefore the whole goal of negotiating with them makes no sense. It's really illogical. If people are worried about security as their top priority, trying to negotiate with Iran, trying to reach the art of the deal with jihadists simply doesn't make sense. But it is one of the possible scenarios. It's clear that President Trump hasn't given up on that yet, and so we have to watch this space. But as you do watch it, keep in mind what I said about the new Israeli security doctrine. Even in the scenario of this somehow returning back to diplomacy, Israel is still going to make sure that existential threats don't develop on Iranian territory to the extent that those are discovered by Israel's very, very qualified and extensive intelligence gathering capabilities and communities. So I think that that's a basic overview of the Iran situation. Let me now take you to Lebanon, where we have a very interesting development. And once again, I urge you to look at this development in Lebanon that I'm about to discuss through the prism of this new Israeli security doctrine. Now, when it comes to our borders, what does this doctrine say? It says that jihadists cannot build armies on our borders ever again. Whatever is needed to prevent that is going to be applied. So in Lebanon, what that means is that Hezbollah, which spent many years and billions of dollars building literal invasion bases on across the southern Lebanese Shiite villages, hundreds of Lebanese Shiite villages were converted into invasion bases, primarily by Hezbollah's elite Radwan unit. the stuff that the IDF is finding in these villages is simply mind-boggling. I mean, you're talking about bunkers here filled with RPG launchers, and you saw what those can do on October 7th. Those are anti-home rocket launchers. They destroy homes and vehicles. That's what terror armies use them for. And whatever happened on October 7th, in terms of how horrific it was, the unprecedented darkest day, imagine that times 5 or times 10. That's what Hezbollah was planning for the Galilee, sending death squads into northern Israel. More of them, better trained and even better armed. That's what Hezbollah was planning, and this was a plan that actually Hamas copied and applied in the most horrific and brutal way on October 7th in the south of Israel. That's what Hezbollah was planning to do to the north of Israel. And so this new Israeli security doctrine says, never again are jihadists going to be allowed to build an army on Israel's border, whether it's in Lebanon or Gaza or Syria. And the IDF is just going to try and defend from the borderline. It's impossible. It doesn't work. It violates the most basic defense doctrine of how to defend from a border. You cannot do it when the enemy is situated across the border, not in uniform, but hiding in all of the various civilian villages, homes, hospitals, in tunnels, all of the human shielding that they employ. They cannot be allowed to reform back on the border. That's why there is a security zone in southern Lebanon, a reestablished Israeli security zone. It's about 10 kilometers deep. Now, that's setting up the background for what's happening next. What's happening now? Well, tomorrow and the day after, Israel and Lebanon, the Lebanese government, and the United States are sending delegations to Rome, to the American embassy in Rome, where they will discuss the initiation of 2 pilot zones. These are 2 areas. One is just outside of the Israeli security zone. One is just inside. Both of them relatively far from the Israeli border. They're probably the least critical parts of the security zone area. This is where the Lebanese army will be put to the test. They are going to be tested on their ability to locate. They'll be given the information of Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure, to destroy it, and then to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't come back in. And it's really the last part that's the biggest test, because to prevent Hezbollah from taking it over again, they're going to have to clash with Hezbollah at some point sooner or later. And this becomes very complicated because, okay, it sounds easy in theory, and it's being paraded in the media and international circles as a great solution. But actually, when the devil's in the detail. Which kind of unit in the Lebanese army is up to this task? Surely it's not going to be the units that have Shiite officers that come from the same villages as Hezbollah, who have cooperated with Hezbollah for years. Hezbollah has infiltrated even the intelligence units of the Lebanese armed forces. And because of the sectarian nature of Lebanese society, the fact that half or even a little bit more than half of the Lebanese armed forces is made up of Shiites is a huge problem. This is why they failed to demilitarize southern Lebanon last year, even though they claimed to. So whatever comments are coming out, we have to be deeply skeptical. Now, there is a point to be made that there's a value in this process as well. Why? First of all, the Lebanese government has formally acknowledged that Israel has a right to stay in southern Lebanon until it can prove that it can take it over. That is, in terms of diplomatic and political legitimacy, that is a big deal. I'm not playing that down, because that is a reflection of a change in Lebanon in terms of at least the decision makers in Beirut understand they have to work with Israel against Hezbollah and against Iran if they want to rid themselves of the real occupation of Lebanon, which is, of course, by Iran through its proxy, Hezbollah. That's the whole point of Hezbollah, is to turn Lebanon into a province of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, to brainwash Shiites into martyrdom culture, to build independent schools that are not run by Beirut, by Lebanon, but by Tehran, to have a whole parallel shadow state, which is now, by the way, has been basically dismembered by the IDF in southern Lebanon. But everybody who's saying that Israel should withdraw now, what they're basically saying is, give southern Lebanon back to Iran and Hezbollah. And it's not going to happen. So what they are talking about now are these 2 pilot zones. And this is now a performance-based test. It's not a faith-based test. In the past, Israel withdrew based on promises and faith, and that was a disaster. That's what led to October 7th, is withdrawing before we know who's on the other side of the border. That mistake is not going to be made again. So you're seeing the new Israeli security doctrine applied very systematically and significantly here in southern Lebanon. And that's why these two pilot zones are going to be a test. If the Lebanese army and government can prove and surprise us all that they can take hold of these areas and keep Hezbollah out, that's a positive sign. And Israel will be the first to congratulate them. If they can't, well, then they're going to have to understand that the IDF will make no further withdrawals anytime soon. So it's up to Lebanon to prove whether they can or can't handle their own sovereignty. I'm extremely skeptical that they'll be able to do it based on their limited capabilities, based on their sectarian makeup. But I would be more than glad to be proven wrong. I'd be very happy. At this point, I'm very skeptical. And remember, the main thing is that jihadists are not allowed to build armed forces on anywhere near our border again. So whether it's the IDF or a responsible actor that has proven and passed an actual test with concrete criteria that is in charge of the border area, it's going to be one or the other. And what that means really in practice is that the IDF is going to be in southern Lebanon for a long time to come. I think that's a safe bet. So I think that covers Iran and Lebanon. Now, let me talk to you briefly about an issue that actually Benjamin asked me to discuss with you, and that is the letter that was sent by the IDF Chief of Staff to the Knesset regarding troop shortages and the need to basically recruit ultra-Orthodox Israelis. This is an extremely sensitive and painful issue within Israeli society. I'm going to try and present you with a brief overview of the facts. Look, the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, what he's saying is something very, very simple. Because of our new security reality, and as I've just finished discussing, we have a security zone in southern Lebanon. There's a big security zone in the Gaza Strip. We haven't gotten that today. I've talked to you about that in past episodes, but Israel is in operational control of over 60% of Gaza. There's a security zone in southern Syria. And there are the day-to-day operations in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. All of these arenas require divisions, brigades, battalions, soldiers, officers, reservists, conscripts, career personnel. This requires, this effort, Israel's new security doctrine, which is critical for our ongoing survival in this region, requires a lot of soldiers. You don't have to be a military strategist to understand that the idea of a small army, which unfortunately was propagated and supported by former senior military people in this country and has now been abandoned, clearly, that idea is not going to work in our reality. Now, there are going to be autonomous systems coming online. Perhaps one day we can do a briefing on that, because there are some incredible developments going on that front. But we're not at the stage in 2026 where robots and autonomous systems can replace in any way the need for our young men and women to take up the call of the nation and protect the people. And so what does that mean? It means that the IDF is dealing with exhausted reservists, people who have been called up time and again for hundreds of days in total of reserve duty. It means the conscripted period of time has to be extended so that the conscripted army is big enough and stays in operations long enough to be rotated throughout these various arenas. And this is what led to the letter. The Chief of Staff is basically saying that the IDF cannot give up on the goal of recruiting ultra-Orthodox soldiers. There was an attempt by the government to reach a deal with the ultra-Orthodox parties. I'm not going to go into the high-resolution ins and outs of this. This is getting into politics. But part of that deal is an attempt to basically refrain from criminalizing draft dodgers in the ultra-Orthodox community. Now, the IDF does not want to go down that route. It wants to use pressure to try and basically push the ultra-Orthodox youth to join the ranks of the IDF, because we've reached a point in time in our security and our history where it's just too many members of this part of Israeli society are avoiding the call to serve. And it's not a situation that's tenable. It's not a political statement. This is a statement of fact. The IDF has got to have access to the next generation of ultra-Orthodox youth. They make excellent soldiers. They make fine soldiers. How do we know that? Well, we've got a new brigade, an ultra-Orthodox brigade called HaChashmonaim, the Hasmonean Brigade. They're performing very well. They just got going. Before that, there was an ultra-Orthodox battalion. And the IDF proved through these programs that it can develop military frameworks that preserve the way of life. They're mandated to pray 3 times a day. There is full kosher setups to satisfy their needs. They have discussions in between training or operational activities. They have texts and learning, and so the entire way of life is preserved. And the IDF has proven that it's up to the challenge. Now, it's part of a dialogue. There has to obviously be a dialogue with the rabbis of this community, the leaders of this community. But I think that after October 7th, it's increasingly clear to growing members of Israeli society, wherever they are located on the political map. It's not about right or left. That the time where an exemption could be given to an entire sector of Israeli society, that time is over. It's just not tenable and not sustainable. And that is part of the discussion that this letter by the Chief of Staff is part of. This is one of the reasons why the letter was sent. It obviously sparked the firestorm of political controversy, but I am here saying this is not really about politics. This is about security. And in security, everybody has to play their part. There are also options for national service. By the way, that includes Arab Israelis. And there are some encouraging polls that many Arab Israelis would be interested in doing national service. That could even be, volunteering with paramedics, fire service, hospitals. There are so many ways that young people can serve their country. And I think it's time that everybody does in this country, or answers the call and sees where they can fit in. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much again for your viewership, for your feedback. I hope that soon I'll be able to also do a podcast with Benjamin. I certainly miss the times that we were discussing all of these topics together, and I'm sure that we'll be doing that again as well. So until the next time, and check in on the MirYam Institute website. I'm also going to be producing a paper updating on some of these issues, so definitely visit the MirYam Institute official website. And until the next briefing, we will remain in touch.